In the dazzling yet discriminatory world of a luxury restaurant, young black waitress Nia endures daily humiliation while struggling to make ends meet. For her, dreams seemed unreachable, until one relentless night changed everything. When the CEO of a company she deeply admired dined at the restaurant, Nia took a bold, life-changing risk. She wrote down her struggles and some ideas she believed could benefit his company on a scrap of paper. When the manager noticed, she was immediately fired. Yet, her act of defiance did not go to waste. Nia would soon prove herself through real achievements and, with the CEO's support, return to the very restaurant, not as an employee but as a distinguished guest. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The clink of silverware against fine bone china was a symphony of wealth that Nia had come to know intimately. It was a sound that, to her, had no rhythm or melody, only the hollow, relentless beat of her own desperation. At 22, with a degree she'd worked 3 jobs to earn, she found herself not in the vibrant world of creative design she had once envisioned, but in the suffocating opulence of the grandeur table. The restaurant was less a place to eat and more a testament to exorbitant success, where the air was thick with the scent of aged whiskey and fresh-cut roses, and every surface gleamed with the polished sheen of prosperity. Nia moved through this world like a ghost. Her uniform, a simple black sheath dress, felt less like a professional garment and more like an invisible cloak, designed to render her unseen, unheard. She had to be. This was not a place for personality or vibrant expression, especially not for someone like her. The manager, a man named Sterling, with a perpetually pinched expression and an aversion to eye contact that he reserved exclusively for Nia, had made that abundantly clear on her first day. "You will serve," he had said, his voice as smooth and cold as the marble floors they stood on. "You will be a part of the decor. You will not be an interruption." He had meant it. The unspoken rules of the grandeur table were a complex, cruel dance. The other waitstaff, a tight-knit clique of predominantly white women who shared stories of ski trips and summer houses, treated Nia with a chilling politeness that was more alienating than outright hostility. They would talk over her in meetings, accidentally bump into her in the narrow walkways, and consistently, almost surgically, steer their most demanding and least generous tables in her direction. It was a form of silent persecution, an endless drip of microaggressions that wore her down like water on stone. "A table for 2, Nia, by the kitchen door," Sterling would announce with a faint smirk, assigning her the worst spot in the house while other waitstaff fought over the coveted window seats with views of the glittering city skyline. The tables were not just places to sit, they were social signifiers. The kitchen door table was a dead end, reserved for last-minute walk-ins, and she was certain for her. Her financial reality was a constant, gnawing anxiety that mirrored the restaurant's relentless pressure. The small one-bedroom apartment she shared with a ghost of hope and an endless stack of overdue bills felt a million miles away from the gilded cage of her workplace. Every paycheck was a desperate calculation. How much for rent, how much for groceries, how much to send home to her mother. The tips were supposed to be the cushion, the reason to endure, but they were as unpredictable as the diners. When a wealthy customer found a reason to complain, a slight delay, a wine glass not polished to perfection, the tip would vanish, leaving a void that felt as deep and empty as her own pocket. Her dream, the one that kept her going, was a fragile thing she kept close to her heart. She dreamed of working at Ethelred Couture, a design and apparel company known for its groundbreaking sustainability practices and minimalist, elegant aesthetic. It was not a technology giant, but a purveyor of beauty and conscious living, a world away from the excess she was forced to witness every day. She followed their every move online, studied their campaigns, and had a folder on her laptop filled with design sketches she hoped, one day, to present to them. But the gap between her reality and her ambition was a chasm she couldn't seem to bridge. One day, as she was polishing silver for the dinner service, her coworker Jessica sauntered by, a contemptuous look on her face. "Still playing with the cutlery, Nia? Don't you think it's time to move up?" she sneered, her voice a low whisper meant only for Nia's ears. "Some of us actually have lives, you know." The barb was as sharp as the knife she held in her hand, and it landed squarely in the center of her chest. Nia didn't respond, she couldn't. She simply smiled, a polite, distant smile, the mask she had perfected to survive, and polished harder. The constant humiliation was a heavy cloak she wore. It made her shoulders slump, her voice soft, and her movements precise, all to avoid drawing attention to herself. The luxury around her, which should have been inspiring, felt like a mockery. She saw patrons drop more on a single bottle of wine than she made in 2 weeks, laughing and toasting while her stomach ached with the memory of a skipped lunch. The disparity was suffocating. Every day felt like an exercise in emotional endurance, a test she was barely passing. As the evening approached, the restaurant began to fill with the usual clientele, the hedge fund managers, the socialites, the people who ordered with the effortless authority of those who have never been denied. Nia took her place by the kitchen door, ready to serve, a small worn-out notebook in her apron pocket. It was filled with her designs and her dreams, a tiny rebellion against the world that was trying to erase her. For now she would be a ghost, a servant, but she knew deep down that she was meant for more. The question was, how could she possibly get there? The answer felt a million miles away. Julian Vance did not own the city, but it often felt like it. From the expansive windows of his corner office, the skyline stretched out in a silent, shimmering testament to ambition and power. At 35 he was the youngest CEO in the history of Ethelred Couture, a title that felt less like an honor and more like an inherited burden. His father, a visionary in ethical fashion, had built the company on the principles of integrity and timeless design. Julian had always admired his father's work, but the day he took the helm, the elegance of the brand was overshadowed by the relentless, grinding machinery of corporate life. He was no longer just a designer. He was a balance sheet, a quarterly report, a public-facing symbol of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. His day was a blur of meetings, each one a different kind of negotiation. This morning it was the board, pushing for a new, cheaper manufacturing process that Julian knew would compromise the very integrity his father had so carefully cultivated. Cost efficiency, Julian, the chairman had droned on, his voice a gravelly echo of a bygone era. The market demands it. Julian had listened, his jaw tight, his mind 1,000 miles away, sketching a new pattern on the corner of his legal pad. He had inherited a legacy, but he felt like he was losing the soul of the company one spreadsheet at a time. The world saw a successful CEO, a man with everything, but he often felt trapped, a gilded bird in a cage of his own making. He had always found solace in the details, the texture of a new fabric, the clean line of a minimalist jacket, the subtle shift in color as a thread caught the light. These were the things that had first drawn him to design, the small, quiet victories of creation. Now, his days were consumed by numbers and projections, by the sterile language of finance. He was a creator forced to be a manager, and the disconnect was a constant, low-level ache. He missed the workshop, the hum of sewing machines, the smell of fresh linen. He missed the feeling of his hands creating something tangible, something that mattered beyond the bottom line. Julian's personal life was just as curated and distant as his professional one. His social calendar was an endless parade of galas, charity dinners, and private club meetings, each one a strategic performance. He was expected to attend, to be seen, to network. He smiled, he shook hands, he made polite conversation, all while feeling profoundly disconnected from the people and the moments. He had a penthouse with a stunning view, a collection of vintage cars, and a list of acquaintances that stretched across continents, but he felt an emptiness, a hollowness that even the most expensive champagne couldn't fill. He had once confided in his father, just before he passed, about this feeling of being a fraud. His father had simply smiled and said, "The greatest luxury, my son, is the freedom to choose your own path, even when others believe they have chosen it for you." The words had stuck with him, a quiet challenge he hadn't yet been able to meet. He was a good man with a good heart, but he was drowning in expectations, both his own and those of the world around him. He longed for something real, something unscripted, something that wasn't about cost efficiency or market share. The latest crisis was a PR nightmare. A rival company had been caught using questionable labor practices, and the media was now scrutinizing the entire industry. Julian had spent the last 2 days fielding calls, reassuring investors, and doubling down on Ethelred's commitment to ethical sourcing. It was a stressful, exhausting dance, and he was tired of it. He felt the weight of his father's legacy on his shoulders, the responsibility to not just maintain the company's success, but to protect its values. He craved a moment of normalcy, a simple meal without an agenda, a quiet evening where he didn't have to be Julian Vance, CEO. He reached for his phone, a sleek device that felt more like a leash than a tool. He scrolled through his contacts, past his publicist, his head of design, his driver. His finger paused over a contact he rarely used, the number for the head waiter at the grandeur table. He had dined there before, a place of silent service and effortless discretion. It was exactly the kind of place to escape for an hour, to be a ghost, just another face in a sea of wealth. He needed to be invisible, to think, to breathe. He made a reservation for a party of one, requested a table where he could be discreetly tucked away, and let the quiet efficiency of the process take over. Little did he know he was about to be seen in a way he had never expected. The weight of his world, he was about to discover, was nothing compared to the quiet strength of another. The two disparate lives, one overflowing with privilege and the other with scarcity, were about to collide, and in that collision, something truly unexpected would be born. The grandeur table was at its zenith. The restaurant hummed with the soft murmur of conversations and the delicate clinking of silver, a symphony of orchestrated elegance that Julian Vance had long ago learned to tune out. He sat in his requested corner, a seemingly invisible part of the evening's tableau, yet acutely aware of every detail. The wine list was an encyclopedia of vintages he had already tasted, the menu a predictable dance of culinary classics. This was the kind of luxury that was supposed to impress, but to Julian, it was merely an elegant, empty space. He felt the familiar weight of his persona pressing down on him, the expectation to be seen as the successful CEO, a man who belonged effortlessly in this world. But all he saw was a meticulously crafted facade, a collection of expensive things that lacked any soul. A flicker of movement by the kitchen door caught his eye. A waitress, a young black woman with a quiet intensity in her eyes, was making her way toward him. She moved with a practiced grace, her uniform a stark contrast to the opulence around her. There was something in her posture, a subtle but undeniable weariness, that Julian recognized. He saw a kindred spirit in the gilded cage. He had seen countless people like her, staff who were supposed to be invisible, their personal realities and aspirations erased by the demands of service. But this woman was different. There was a strength in her eyes, a quiet defiance that spoke of a story untold. Nia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and disbelief. She had seen his name on the reservation list, Julian Vance, and a cold wave of dread had washed over her. She knew who he was. She had spent countless hours studying his company, dreaming of a life within its walls. And now he was her table, a responsibility that felt both like a cruel twist of fate and a moment of cosmic irony. The weight of it was suffocating. She knew the rules: be a ghost, a silent part of the scenery. But as she approached him, the old familiar words of her mother echoed in her mind. Your talent is a gift, Nia. You've got to make a place for it in the world. She forced a calm smile onto her face, the mask she wore every night. Good evening, sir. My name is Nia, and I will be your server tonight. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but Julian leaned forward as if genuinely interested. He nodded, his gaze direct and unnerving. He wasn't looking at her as a server, but as a person. The scrutiny made her feel seen in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She held her breath, reciting the evening specials with a practiced efficiency she had mastered to block out the noise of her own fear. As he ordered, his questions were surprisingly specific, not about the food's ingredients but about the restaurant's sourcing. Do you know where the duck comes from? He asked, his tone genuinely curious. Is it locally sourced? The question was so far from the usual haughty pronouncements she received. She answered, her voice gaining a little more confidence, and a tiny part of her began to thaw. She saw not the monolithic, untouchable CEO, but a man who cared about the details, a man who seemed to value authenticity. It was a fleeting thought, but it was enough. Back in the kitchen, as she waited for his order, the old familiar fear was replaced by a sudden, desperate surge of courage. This was her moment. The man who held the key to her dreams was sitting at her table. She had to do something, anything, to bridge the impossible chasm between her world and his. She pulled out the worn notebook from her apron pocket, the one filled with her dreams and designs. Her hands trembled as she tore out a small blank page. She didn't have time to write a masterpiece or a resume or a cover letter. It had to be a single, powerful message, something that would cut through the noise of his world and land squarely on his heart. She thought of the conversation about sustainability and his company's recent troubles with labor practices, and an idea came to her, A single elegant solution that had been simmering in her mind for weeks. With a shaky hand she wrote it down, her neat, precise handwriting a stark contrast to the frantic energy in her chest. It was a simple, elegant suggestion for a new line of products, something that combined sustainable practices with a unique, minimalist design element she had been developing. She didn't mention her name or her situation. She simply wrote the idea, signed it with her initials, NJ, and wrote at the bottom, "For the soul of Ethelred." The words were a gamble, a last-ditch effort that could cost her everything. Sterling had been watching her like a hawk all night, and a single wrong move would be her last. But the risk of doing nothing, of letting this one impossible opportunity pass her by, was a fate she couldn't bear. As she returned to his table with the bread basket, her heart felt like a wild bird trapped in a cage. She moved with a purpose she hadn't felt in a long time, her hands betraying no sign of the turmoil within. As she placed the bread basket on the table, she held the small, folded note in the palm of her hand. She put her hand out, the note tucked neatly under his menu. Julian, a man accustomed to discreet requests and hushed conversations, saw her hand in the note, and his eyes widened just a fraction. He took it, his fingers brushing against hers, a fleeting moment of contact that felt like a spark. He waited for her to leave before he unfolded the note, his curiosity piqued. As his eyes scanned the words, a gasp of genuine surprise escaped him, a sound so soft it was lost in the hum of the room. The note wasn't a request for an autograph or a plea for money. It was an idea. A brilliant, simple and deeply insightful idea that spoke directly to his company's core values and its current struggles. He had been looking for a solution to their PR and design challenges for weeks, and here, from a quiet, unseen waitress, was the answer he had been searching for. The words, "For the soul of Ethelred," resonated deep within him, a powerful, unspoken validation of his own fears and desires. He looked up, searching for her in the crowded room. She was at a table across the way, clearing plates, her face a mask of polite indifference. He watched her, a newfound respect blooming in his chest. As she made her way back to his table with his dessert, he felt a sudden, powerful need to do something, to respond to the raw, unadorned courage of her action. He reached into his wallet, pulled out his business card, and with a quick, decisive motion, he placed it on the tray as she took the plates. "Here," he said, his voice low and firm. "Contact me." He watched her pick up the card, her eyes wide with shock. She looked from the card to him, 1,000 questions in her gaze. It was a silent, powerful exchange, a moment of connection that was immediately, brutally shattered. "What do you think you're doing, Nia?" Sterling's voice, sharp and icy, cut through the quiet room like a knife. He had seen the exchange, his face a mask of contemptuous fury. He snatched the tray from her hands, nearly spilling the dessert. "You think you can solicit our clientele? You are a servant, not a salesperson." His voice rose, carrying across the room, and for the first time that night, Julian Vance felt his own anger rise. "Excuse me," Julian interjected, his voice calm but with a razor-sharp edge. "This was my request." Sterling ignored him completely, his eyes locked on Nia. "Don't bother clocking in tomorrow, Nia. You're fired." He spun around, his face flushed with triumph. "You think you can play with the big boys? You are nothing but a disappointment." But Nia didn't flinch. She simply looked at Sterling, and for the first time she saw him not as a figure of authority, but as a small, pathetic man. She looked at the business card in her hand, Julian's name and title, a promise of a new life. She had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. She nodded once at Julian, a silent thank you, and walked past Sterling, her head held high. The symphony of wealth still played, but for the first time she was not a part of its silent rhythm. She was a different kind of song, and she was just beginning to find her voice. She walked out of the grandeur table and into the night, the business card a burning ember of hope in her hand, the city lights a silent witness to her first step toward freedom. The city lights, once a distant, glittering spectacle of a world she couldn't touch, now felt like a blinding, mocking spotlight. Nia stood on the sidewalk outside the grandeur table, the icy night air a stark contrast to the burning ember of hope she clutched in her hand. Julian Vance's business card. It felt impossibly heavy, a small rectangle of cardstock that represented not just a man's name, but a lifeline, a chance, a path forward she had never dared to dream of. The shock of being fired had not yet fully registered, But the sting of Sterling's words, "You are nothing but a disappointment," was a physical ache. She had been cast out, publicly humiliated, and yet, for the first time in months, she felt a profound sense of lightness. The crushing weight of the restaurant, the constant vigilance, the silent, cutting cruelty, it was all gone. She was untethered, and the terrifying void of unemployment was filled by a single, exhilarating question. What now? Her mind replayed the scene like a movie on a continuous loop. The whispered conversation, the shared glance, the firm press of the business card, and Sterling's furious, hateful outburst. Julian Vance hadn't just given her his card. He had defended her. His calm, authoritative, "This was my request," had been a shield in the face of Sterling's venom. It was an act of genuine human kindness, one she hadn't expected from a man in his position. It gave her the courage she needed. This wasn't a handout. This was a response to her courage. It was an invitation. Back in her small apartment, the fluorescent light of the kitchen cast long shadows over the unpaid bills on her table. The reality of her situation came crashing down, cold and hard. Without a job, she had 2 weeks of rent money left, maybe 3 if she ate nothing but instant noodles. The fear was a familiar demon, but this time it was different. It didn't paralyze her. It propelled her. She needed to make the call. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the numbers on the business card. Was this a good idea? Was it too late? Would he even remember her? The doubts swirled, a chaotic tempest of anxiety. But she thought of the words on her note, "For the soul of Ethelred," and she knew she had to see this through. This wasn't just about a job, it was about her own belief in her talent. It was about proving Sterling wrong. It was about her mother's words ringing in her ears. She took a deep breath, and with a resolve born of desperation, she dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, and then a crisp, professional voice answered. "Julian Vance's office, this is Sarah." The voice was as polished and unyielding as the grandeur table's marble floors. "Hi, my name is Nia Johnson," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I was told to call this number by Mr. Vance." A beat of silence. "And what is the nature of your inquiry?" Sarah's tone was dismissive, bored. Nia could almost see the woman's eyes rolling on the other end. It's about a professional matter. He gave me his business card last night at a restaurant," Nia said, forcing herself to sound more confident than she felt. Another pause, longer this time. "I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson, but Mr. Vance doesn't give out his personal information. Are you sure you have the right number?" The implication was clear. "You're mistaken, a nobody trying to get in." A wave of humiliation washed over Nia. This was it. She was right. It was just a polite gesture, a meaningless formality. But then she remembered the look in his eyes. The genuine surprise. The immediate, decisive action. "Yes, I'm certain," she said, her voice firm now. "It was last night at the grandeur table. He gave me the card in exchange for a note I wrote him." The mention of the grandeur table and the note seemed to trigger something. "Please hold." The line went silent, and Nia's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She waited, every second an eternity. She was certain she was about to be told to get lost, that it was a prank, a mistake. But then the line clicked back to life. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Vance will see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. His office is on the top floor of the Vance Tower. Do you know the address?" Sarah's voice had shifted from ice to a grudging, professional curiosity. The simple fact that he remembered, that he had a meeting for her, filled Nia with a dizzying rush of triumph. The next morning, Nia stood in the lobby of the Vance Tower, a glass and steel monolith that seemed to scrape the sky. She wore her best but slightly worn dress and a pair of sensible flats. The building was a world of hushed professionalism, of sleek design and silent elevators. She felt every bit the outsider she was. But as she stepped out on the top floor, the elegant, minimalist aesthetic of the Ethelred Couture office filled her with a profound sense of belonging. The walls were adorned with simple, beautiful sketches, the colors muted and natural. This was the place she had dreamed of. This was the soul of the company she had been looking for. Sarah, a woman with a sharp bob and an even sharper suit, escorted her to Julian's office. He was standing by the window, his back to her, a man dwarfed by the immense skyline. He turned as she entered, and for the first time she saw him without the noise and chaos of the restaurant. He was even more handsome and imposing in the light of day, but his eyes held the same warmth and curiosity she had seen the night before. "Nia," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Vance," she replied, her voice firm and clear. He gestured for her to sit in a chair opposite his desk, which was impeccably clean except for a single small folded piece of paper, the note she had given him. "You have no idea how much I needed this," he said, tapping the note with a finger. "We've been at a crossroads, you know? The market wants us to compromise, to cut corners. And I've been fighting that, but it's an exhausting battle. And then you gave me this." He gestured to the note. A simple, elegant solution. It was a jolt of creative clarity. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't just about an idea, Nia. It's about a different way of thinking. The courage to see a problem and propose a solution, not as an employee but as an observer. It was incredibly brave. And I'm a man who believes in rewarding courage." He leaned forward, his elbows on his desk. "I'm not going to give you a job." Her heart plummeted. She had been so sure. All the hope drained out of her in a single gut-wrenching moment. "I'm going to give you a challenge," he continued, a faint smile on his face. "This is a test. You'll have a budget of $5,000. You will design, source the materials for, and create a prototype for the collection you outlined in your note. You'll have 6 weeks. At the end of that time, you'll present it to me and a small, select group of our head designers. I will not help you. My team will not help you. You have the name of my head of sourcing, but she is only permitted to tell you what local, sustainable suppliers we use. She can't assist you in any other way. This is all on you. You'll work from home and there will be no regular check-ins. You will either succeed on your own merit or you will fail. The budget is for materials only. And at the end of the 6 weeks, if your work is compelling, if it shows the raw talent I believe you have, we can talk about a place for you on the team. Do you accept these conditions?" Nia stared at him, stunned. It was not what she had expected. She had been prepared for a job interview, not a test of fire. The conditions were harsh, the budget was small, and the timeline was impossibly tight. This wasn't a shortcut, it was a gauntlet. But as she looked at him, she saw the challenge in his eyes, the sincere desire to see if her courage was matched by her talent. He wasn't giving her a free pass, he was giving her a chance to truly earn her place. It was the most honest, respectful offer she had ever received. "I accept," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She hadn't been able to speak about her dreams to anyone at the grandeur table, but in this room, her dreams were being put to the ultimate test. As she stood up and shook his hand, she was no longer a waitress from the grandeur table, a girl on the margins of a world she served but couldn't enter. She was a designer, an artist, a woman with a purpose. She walked out of the Vance Tower and into the city, the weight of the past finally gone, replaced by the exhilarating, terrifying burden of a future she now had to create for herself. She had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The $5,000 check from Ethelred Couture felt less like a gift and more like a heavy stone in Nia's pocket. It was the key to her freedom, but it came with an immense weight of expectation. She was a waitress, a woman with a dream she had only ever sketched in a worn-out notebook. Now, she had 6 weeks to transform that dream into a tangible reality, with a budget that would barely cover the fabric for a single couture dress at Julian's company. The clock was ticking, and the silence of her tiny apartment, once a comfort, was now deafening. It was a blank canvas that needed to be filled with work, with a future she had to build from the ground up. Her first week was a chaotic dance of research and disbelief. She spent every waking hour glued to her laptop at the local library, poring over textile suppliers, pricing lists, and sustainable manufacturing practices. The vocabulary was a foreign language: organic cotton, recycled polyester, ethical labor standards. She quickly realized her small budget wouldn't even begin to cover the cost of the high-end, exclusive materials that Ethelred was known for. This was not a test of her design, it was a test of her resourcefulness. She had to find a way to create luxury from scarcity, to find beauty in overlooked places. It was a challenge that spoke to her very core. She had lived her entire life turning scraps into something beautiful, and this was no different. She made the call to Julian's head of sourcing, a woman named Lena. The conversation was brief, polite, and frustratingly unhelpful. Lena's voice was as smooth and professional as a corporate welcome message. "I can only confirm that we work with the following local, sustainable suppliers: Lena said, rattling off a list of names. As per Mr. Vance's instructions, I cannot offer any other assistance. There was no warmth, no encouragement, just the sterile fulfillment of a directive. Nia hung up the phone feeling completely alone, but a new resolve hardened in her. This was her test and she would pass it on her own merit. She started her search from the bottom up. She visited small, independent farms that grew hemp and organic cotton, listening to their stories and learning about the painstaking process of creating sustainable fibers. She found a small, family-owned business that specialized in upcycling discarded fabrics and a cooperative of local artisans who wove intricate patterns from natural dyes. She drove her beat-up car to far-flung industrial parks and spoke to a gruff, kind old man who had spent his life sourcing the most ethical threads. She was met with skepticism and curiosity. Who was this young black woman with an impossibly small budget and an audacious vision? But when she pulled out her notebook, the passion in her voice and the clarity of her designs broke through the professional facades. She wasn't trying to get something for nothing, she was offering a partnership, a chance for them to be a part of something bigger. Her apartment, once her sanctuary, became a workshop. Fabric swatches were draped over every available surface. Her tiny kitchen table was covered in sketches, measuring tape and pins. The sewing machine, a gift from her late mother, hummed late into the night. There were moments of sheer, unadulterated joy, when a design came to life with a single stitch, when a color palette she had dreamed of translated perfectly onto the fabric. And there were moments of crushing doubt. A new supplier's shipment was late, forcing her to rework an entire garment. A delicate seam she had spent hours on came undone. The frustration was immense, a hot, angry pressure in her chest, but she refused to give up. She had been counted out her whole life. This time she would prove them all wrong. One night, exhausted and covered in thread, she sat back and looked at the chaos around her. A single, perfectly crafted jacket lay on the floor, the centerpiece of her collection. It was simple, elegant, and timeless. A clean, minimalist design crafted from a recycled wool blend, with delicate stitching and a single, unexpected detail. A small, intricate pattern of natural dyes that she had woven herself. It was the soul of her idea, the essence of Ethelred's brand. She had done it. She had found a way to create luxury without compromising on her values or her vision. The jacket wasn't just a garment, it was a testament to her resilience, a physical manifestation of her talent. With 2 weeks left on the clock, she began working on the final pieces of her collection. A skirt, a pair of trousers, and a lightweight blouse. Each piece was a story of its own, a silent nod to the suppliers and artisans she had met, the long nights she had spent, and the quiet determination that had fueled her. She was no longer just Nia the waitress. She was Nia Johnson the designer. The two halves of her life were finally beginning to merge, and the result was something more powerful than she could have ever imagined. The 6 weeks culminated in a flurry of final stitches, a last-minute trip to a dry cleaner, and a careful packing of her precious prototypes into a garment bag she had purchased with the last of her budget. As she stood in her apartment, the silence was no longer a weight but a peaceful hum of accomplishment. She had met the gauntlet and surpassed it. She had nothing to lose and a world of possibility to gain. She was no longer a girl with a dream, but a woman with a vision, and tomorrow she would finally show the world what she could do. The test was over. Now the real work began. The elevator ride to the top floor of Vance Tower felt like a journey through time and space. Each ascending floor was a world away from the dusty, thread-strewn apartment that had been her sanctuary and workshop for the past 6 weeks. Nia stood in the glass-walled box, the garment bag clutched in her hand, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She was wearing her favorite black dress, the one she had carefully mended and pressed for this occasion, and a simple pair of low heels. It was a humble uniform in a world of bespoke suits and polished designer shoes, but it was her own, and it had been earned. When the doors slid open, she stepped into a different kind of silence. This wasn't the hushed, polite hush of the grandeur table. It was the focused, productive silence of creative minds at work. The main office floor was an open-plan space, filled with sleek desks and large screens displaying intricate design sketches. She saw a group of designers huddled over a swatch book, their expressions a mix of concentration and passion. A young man, his arm covered in tattoos, was meticulously hand-stitching a logo onto a piece of leather. It was a world that felt both alien and profoundly familiar, the same kind of obsessive detailed work that had filled her own apartment for weeks. She felt a flicker of belonging, a quiet certainty that she was in the right place, even if she wasn't yet a part of it. Sarah, the same frosty assistant from her phone call, appeared to escort her to the conference room. Her expression was inscrutable, but a hint of professional curiosity softened her eyes. Nia saw the way Sarah's gaze lingered on the garment bag, a silent question in her posture. The conference room was a pristine, intimidating space. The table was a single long slab of polished wood, surrounded by 10 high-backed chairs. Julian Vance sat at the head, looking relaxed but alert. He was flanked by 2 other individuals, a woman with a sharp, geometric haircut and a steely gaze, and a man with a kind face and a neatly trimmed beard. Nia recognized the woman as Lena, the head of sourcing who had been so unhelpful on the phone. The man she guessed was a senior designer. The air in the room was thick with unspoken skepticism. Their expressions were polite, but their eyes were cold. Nia was a curiosity, a temporary inconvenience. She could almost hear their silent thoughts. Who is this girl and what is she doing here? Julian stood and offered a warm smile. Nia, thank you for coming. He gestured to a small table near the window. You have the floor. Nia walked to the front of the room, her palms sweating, but her mind a sudden oasis of calm. She had practiced this moment 1,000 times in her head. She had rehearsed her words, the order of her prototypes, the story she wanted to tell. This wasn't just about a collection, it was about the idea behind it. She took a deep breath and began. Good morning, she started, her voice clear and strong. She didn't bother with small talk. She jumped straight into her thesis, her passion for sustainable design and ethical sourcing. When Mr. Vance first gave me this challenge, I knew I couldn't compete with the resources of a company like Ethelred. I knew I couldn't create what you do. So, I decided to focus on what you couldn't do. Julian raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest in his eyes. Lena and the other designer, however, remained impassive. I went to the source, Nia continued, her words gaining momentum. She explained her journey, meeting the hemp farmers, the upcycling artisans, the families who had dedicated their lives to creating textiles with a smaller carbon footprint. She spoke of the challenge of a limited budget, not as a hindrance, but as a creative constraint that had forced her to be more innovative, more personal. The fashion industry is often seen as being built on excess and waste, she said, her gaze sweeping over the designers. But I believe luxury can be built on a different foundation, of story, of purpose, of human connection. The soul of Ethelred is not just in its designs. It's in the hands that create them, the materials that make them, the values they represent. I tried to capture that in my prototypes. She unzipped the garment bag and carefully pulled out the first piece, the jacket. She held it up for them to see, a simple, elegant garment. It was impeccably cut, the seams flawless, the drape perfect. The recycled wool was of a quality that seemed impossible for her budget, and the subtle, woven pattern she had created from natural dyes added a unique texture and depth. The room was silent. Lena leaned forward, her professional mask finally cracking. She got up and walked around the table, her hands hovering over the garment. The stitching, it's all hand-finished, she murmured, a note of awe in her voice. And the material, where did you find this? Nia explained her process, her voice now filled with the infectious excitement of a creator. She walked them through the upcycling process, explaining how the wool had been salvaged from discarded military uniforms and respun into a new luxurious fiber. She showed them the intricate dye work, a detail that was so subtle it could easily be missed but added a rich, tactile dimension to the piece. Next, she presented the skirt, a fluid, beautiful garment made from locally sourced organic cotton. She explained how she had worked with a small cooperative to develop a new weave that gave the fabric a subtle sheen, a quality she had only seen in high-end silks. The final piece, the blouse, was crafted from a blend of hemp and bamboo, a material so soft it seemed to defy logic. She had designed it with a minimalist aesthetic, allowing the quality of the material to speak for itself. I didn't try to make a collection for Ethelred, Nia concluded, her voice soft but powerful. I tried to make a collection that could become Ethelred. The other designer, a man named Michael, spoke for the first time. The cost of materials, it's a fraction of our usual spend. And the quality, it's remarkable. The designs are simple but they have a point of view. They're telling a story. His words were an endorsement, a professional validation that she had longed for. All eyes turned to Julian. He had been watching her throughout the presentation, a faint smile playing on his lips. His gaze was no longer just curious, it was one of profound respect. He had seen her raw courage at the restaurant, but now he was seeing her raw talent, the intellect and dedication that had been simmering beneath the surface all along. He looked at his team, then back at Nia. "Congratulations, Nia," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. "You've not only passed the test, you've exceeded it." He stood, walking to her with a confident stride. "You've shown us that you have the talent, the vision, and the work ethic to not only work at Ethelred but to help us redefine what our company can be. I'm offering you a position as a junior designer. Your salary will be commensurate with a full-time employee, and your contract will be for 1 year, at which point we will review your performance. You will report to Michael and you will work on the next season's collection. You will be a part of our core team. Do you accept?" Nia felt a rush of emotion so overwhelming she thought she might cry. It was more than a job offer. It was a full, unequivocal acceptance into a world she had only ever looked at from the outside. She wasn't just in the door, she was at the table. She met Julian's gaze, her eyes shining with tears of triumph. "I accept," she said, her voice trembling slightly. As they shook hands, the weight she had carried for so long finally lifted, replaced by a new, exhilarating sense of purpose. She had walked in as a waitress, a ghost of a person, and was walking out as a designer, a woman with a future she had built with her own 2 hands. The gauntlet was over and the path forward was clear. Nia has officially entered the world of Ethelred Couture. Nia's first day at Ethelred Couture was a mix of surreal joy and gnawing anxiety. The office was a hub of hushed activity, a stark contrast to the chaotic clamor of the grandeur table. Her workspace was a small desk with a large, clean screen and a fresh, empty notebook, a blank slate waiting to be filled with the future she had fought so hard for. Michael, her new manager, a man with a quiet disposition and a discerning eye, introduced her to the team. She was a curiosity, a whispered rumor that had come to life. The younger designers were intrigued, the veterans were wary, and Lena, the head of sourcing, offered only a curt, professional nod before disappearing into her own domain. The first few weeks were a brutal immersion. She was a sponge, soaking up every detail of the design process, from initial concepts to final production. She learned the rhythms of the company, the unspoken rules, and the meticulous precision that went into every single garment. The pressure was immense. She was not only expected to contribute but to prove that Julian's unorthodox decision had been a sound one. There were moments of quiet doubt, late nights when she felt like an imposter, a girl from the wrong side of the city who had somehow stumbled into a world of impossible standards. She would look at the sleek designs on the screens around her, the perfectly rendered fabric textures, and wonder if her raw talent was enough to keep pace with such polished professionalism. But Nia had an advantage they didn't. She had worked from the bottom up. She knew the value of a single thread, the importance of a clean seam, the resourcefulness it took to make something out of nothing. Her time at the grandeur table had trained her to observe, to listen, and to anticipate needs before they were spoken. She noticed small inefficiencies in the team's processes, a subtle disconnect between the designers and the production line. Her unique background gave her a perspective that was both humble and invaluable. While they thought in terms of grand concepts and high-end materials, she thought in terms of practical application and a more tangible beauty. A month into her new role, a crisis erupted. A key supplier for the upcoming collection had a major production issue, and a crucial fabric for their showpiece garment, a delicate, custom-woven silk, was going to be delayed by weeks. Panic rippled through the design floor. They had a launch date to meet, and without the silk, the entire collection was at risk. Michael and his team held an emergency meeting, a grim-faced discussion about damage control and finding a costly replacement. Nia sat quietly, listening to the hurried, anxious talk. Everyone was focused on finding a new, equally expensive silk supplier, but her mind drifted back to her own 6-week trial. She remembered the network of small-scale artisans and suppliers she had built, people who worked outside the main corporate supply chain. "What if we don't use silk?" she said, her voice soft but clear. The room fell silent and everyone turned to look at her. "There's a cooperative of weavers I worked with for my prototype. They're masters of natural fibers. They could create a custom blend of organic cotton and hemp that has a similar drape to silk but is far more durable and sustainable. It would be a new kind of luxury, a story that our customers would connect with. Julian, who had been listening from the back of the room, stepped forward. "Tell me more, Nia." She explained her idea with a confident certainty that surprised even herself. She spoke of the cooperative's ethical practices, their meticulous craftsmanship, and the rich texture they could bring to the collection. She had not only an idea but a solution, a practical, cost-effective, and deeply ethical way to solve a major problem. It was a complete departure from the company's usual approach. Michael was skeptical at first, but Julian's face was lit with the same spark of recognition he'd had in the restaurant. He saw in her what he had always believed, that true innovation comes from a different point of view. "I like it," Julian said, a decisive finality in his tone. "Nia, this will be your project. I want you to work directly with the cooperative. You will oversee the design and production of this new fabric. You have creative control." The promotion came just a few weeks later. She was officially elevated to the position of senior designer, tasked with leading her own projects and guiding the work of junior staff. The title was a validation, but the real change was internal. She walked with a new sense of purpose, her head held high. Her colleagues now looked to her for guidance, not out of professional obligation, but out of genuine respect for her talent and her quiet, unwavering vision. Even Lena, who had been a wall of indifference, began to seek her out for advice on alternative sourcing. Nia's unique perspective, once a source of insecurity, was now her greatest asset. Nia's apartment was no longer a makeshift workshop but a sanctuary, a place of peace and inspiration. The rent was paid, the bills were no longer a source of daily dread. She would sit at her kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands, and look out at the city, a city she was now a part of, not just an observer of. She had a new group of friends, colleagues who shared her passions and her dreams. She was no longer defined by her struggles but by her success, and she had built it all with her own hands. One evening, as she was leaving work, Julian stopped her in the lobby. "You know, Nia," he said, "I knew you were smart that night. But what I didn't see was your resilience. The way you've risen to every challenge, the way you've stayed true to your vision. It's more than talent, it's character." He smiled. "The company is better with you in it." His words settled in her heart, a profound affirmation of her journey. She had come from nothing and now she was building a legacy. The girl who had been fired for daring to dream was now one of the most promising young designers in the company. The only piece of the puzzle that remained was the place where her old life had ended, the grandeur table. And as the thought formed in her mind, she knew what she had to do. The time had come to close the loop, to return to the place that had tried to break her and show them what a woman with a purpose could become. Nia has officially ascended and found her place in the world she always dreamed of. The grandeur table was just as Nia remembered it, a mausoleum of muted tones and whispered excess. The scent of expensive wine, polished leather, and subtle floral arrangements hung in the air, a perfume of privilege that had once felt suffocating. Now, as she stepped through the grand, carved oak doors, it was just a scent, a memory of a life she no longer lived. She was not in a uniform but in a custom-designed dress from her most recent collection at Ethelred, a flowing emerald green silk hemp blend that seemed to catch and refract the soft light of the chandeliers. The dress was a story in itself, a testament to her vision and the work of the artisans she had championed. She wore it not as a statement of defiance, but as a quiet celebration of her success. The hostess, a young woman with a polite but detached expression, approached her with a familiar practiced smile. Her eyes scanned Nia's outfit, a flicker of professional approval in her gaze. "Good evening, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" "Under the name Johnson," Nia said, her voice calm and clear. She was not a ghost in this space anymore, she was a presence. The hostess led her through the labyrinth of tables, past the faces of the city's elite. Nia saw some of the old regulars, their faces aglow with the easy confidence of wealth, the same faces she had served night after night. She saw her former co-workers, their expressions impassive as they moved through the room with the practiced grace of shadows. As she passed a small station near the kitchen, a young black waitress looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of recognition and shock. She gave Nia a small, subtle nod of acknowledgement, a silent, shared moment of understanding. Nia was seated at a prime table near the large bay window, a spot typically reserved for the restaurant's most valued and established clientele. She took a moment to look around to truly see the place from a different perspective. She was no longer a part of the backdrop but was at the heart of the scene, a deliberate, undeniable presence. The weight of the moment settled over her, but it was not the suffocating pressure of her past. It was a calm, profound sense of vindication, of a victory won not with bitterness, but with hard work and grace. The sommelier approached her table, but just as he was about to speak, Nia saw a figure emerge from the shadows of the kitchen. It was Sterling. His face, once a mask of cruel contempt, was now slack with a kind of stunned disbelief. His posture, usually so rigid and commanding, was a little slumped. He approached her table with a tray in his hand, not as a manager but as a server. The role reversal was so complete, so sudden, that Nia felt a flicker of surprise herself. He looked down at her, his eyes darting between her confident face and the impeccably tailored dress she wore. "Nia?" he finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Good evening, Sterling," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "It's been a while." She held his gaze without a hint of fear or malice. She wasn't here to gloat. She was here to exist, to show him that her life had not ended that night, but had simply begun. He put the tray on a nearby side table and stood awkwardly, his hands clasped in front of him. I don't know what to say," he stammered, the words tripping over each other. I never thought I would see you again. Especially not like this." Nia simply smiled, a genuine, gentle curve of her lips. "I am just here for a quiet meal. I've always admired the food. The chef is a true artist." Her compliment was a kindness, a way of signaling that this was not a battle but a conversation. Sterling's eyes filled with a pained, apologetic light. The cruelty was gone, replaced by a deep-seated regret. "Nia, what I did that night, it was unforgivable. I was out of line. I was intimidated. By your spirit, by your audacity. I saw you had something more than this place could offer, and I tried to cut you down." He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. "I want to apologize. I was a petty, small man. And you showed me what real power looks like." Nia listened, her heart open to his words but not needing them. She saw his remorse and she accepted it. "I appreciate that, Sterling. It took a lot for you to say that. I heard about you," he continued, a note of genuine awe in his voice. "The whispers. They say you're Julian Vance's protege. That you're the one behind Ethelred's new collection. It was your note, wasn't it?" Nia simply nodded. "I tried to break you, Nia," he said, his voice raw with regret. "And all I did was set you free." She reached across the table and gently touched his arm. "Thank you, Sterling. For the lesson. It was a hard one but it was the one I needed. You taught me that my greatest strength was something no one could ever take from me." She looked him in the eye, a silent affirmation of their shared past and her triumphant present. He nodded, a tear brimming in his eye, and with a quiet reverence, he left her to her meal. The rest of the dinner was a quiet, celebratory affair. Her food was served by a different waiter, a young man who treated her with a deference and respect she had never experienced in this place. The busboys, the hostesses, the kitchen staff, they all seemed to know her story now, and they looked at her not with pity, but with a quiet admiration. She ate her meal, savoring every bite, every moment of this hard-won peace. This was not a moment of revenge, but of personal closure. She was not here to remind Sterling of his mistakes, but to remind herself of her own worth. As she prepared to leave, Nia pulled out her phone. She opened a photo of her and Julian standing in front of Ethelred's flagship store in New York City, smiling triumphantly. The image captured the success that had once seemed impossible. She paid the bill, left a generous tip, and walked out into the cool night air. The city lights seemed brighter, the air fresher. The ghost of her old life had been laid to rest, and in its place was the woman she had always been destined to become. A woman of grace, of power, and of purpose. The gilded cage had not trapped her. It had been the catalyst for her flight, and the world was now hers. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.